officials, community members, and law enforcement partners. We're then going to open it up for questions, and we're trying to be equitable to get all of you in here. So we ask that you just ask a question and perhaps a brief follow-up so we can get on to the next reporter. And that's it for my spiel. So we're going to begin by introducing Mayor Ted Wheeler first. He will lead it off.
And Tim, I still can't record. Tim Gordon can't record.
Okay, Tim, I'll get to you in a second here. So let me find the mayor.
I'm sorry, this is Kelly from K2 again. We seem stuck on only being able to see the ASL interpreter.
Yeah, we're adding the mayor there.
Okay.
Mayor Wheeler, you can go ahead. Thank you.
All right, thank you everybody for being here today. This is obviously a high intensity moment here and in many other communities in America. People are eagerly awaiting the decision with a lot of apprehension, and rightfully so, because there's so much at stake. I understand the apprehension, the historic significance of this moment, and people's concerns about injustice, safety, and our communities need to know that we're as ready as possible for anything. I'm hopeful that any demonstrations in Portland will remain peaceful, but out of necessity, I'm working hard to ensure our law enforcement agencies are well prepared. Based on the evidence we've all seen, I'm personally hopeful that the jury will convict Derek Chauvin of the murder of George Floyd. The decision of the jury will be announced soon. For the last several weeks, we've worked with members of the community and law enforcement to prepare for any eventuality that results from the jury's verdict. Joining me today are prominent community leaders who will talk about the importance of peaceful demonstration. We have representatives of local law enforcement to tell us about their planning for the verdict.
The anti-nausea drug, 2 probiotic flushes. He's going to be sleepy because the anti-nausea one makes him a little sleepy.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but somebody is giving us their medical prescription.
Yes.
Live. I don't think you want to.
Everybody please mute who's not a speaker. Mayor, sorry to have that interruption.
We're all here because we want to help ensure, regardless of the outcome of the trial, that everyone in Portland remains safe. We're here to ensure that our collective response is peaceful. We're here because we want to help ensure a passionate Portland response in keeping with our progressive values, a response centered on the needs of people most impacted, Black men and women and their families. Regardless of the verdict, Portlanders of all walks of life demand that we address fundamental inequities faced by Black, Brown, Indigenous, communities of color, and others. I hear from many Portlanders harmed by systemic injustices rooted in racism. Those injustices are reflected in the justice system, in barriers to housing, in healthcare, jobs, education, and in so many other areas where we know we need to improve. We know Portlanders are committed to addressing these injustices because they showed up by the tens of thousands since the murder of George Floyd to say so. And they followed up with their time, talent, energy, and donations, and with their votes. And still, it's not enough. It's not enough. We all know this. We have so much more work to do. Today, a significant threat to our ability to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic towards a more equitable and inclusive Portland is the group of 100 or so largely white, self-described anarchists who engage in the criminal destruction of our economy and our confidence. Even the Boys and Girls Club in Albina is not immune to this threat. Not even a church that supports the homeless and the LGBTQ community is immune from this threat. Even small BIPOC-owned businesses are targeted. We're going to do everything in our power to prevent the attack on our employers, large and small, and the attack on jobs, and to bring the guilty parties to justice. Let's be clear. Anarchist flyers call for what they describe as, quote, direct action, unquote, which are code words for breaking windows, ransacking businesses, arson, and intimidation. They call for attacks on public employees, They use crime and violence to intimidate those who don't share their political views. These people are not protesters. They are criminals. As you'll hear again from Black leaders, these self-described anarchists are not helping to advance racial justice. Their goal is to destroy the economic center of Oregon, Portland's downtown and neighborhood employment districts. Their actions harm our workers, their families, all of us. They stand in stark contrast to those who seek meaningful change and racial justice that is sorely overdue. We are determined to stop them. We're determined to stand with those seeking real change instead of destruction and violence. And we're determined to address the fundamental failures and ongoing racism that is the source of so much trauma and suffering for Black, brown, and other Portlanders of color. The trial of Derek Chauvin represents a significant waypoint along the path towards racial justice in America. And it's my hope that regardless of the jury's decision, Portlanders will respond with the safety of their neighbors in mind. Portland has a long history of peaceful protest, and we encourage and protect this important right. My expectation as mayor is that we'll do everything we can to provide safety for those who wish to exercise their First Amendment rights as the jury reaches its decision. If some people choose to engage in violence, I want the people in our city to know that we've worked with community leaders and law enforcement to develop a coordinated plan. And I'm here today to tell you about some of the elements of that plan. First, I'm asking employers to make some common sense preparations. If possible, please secure your trash bins and dumpsters. Please store your A-board signs and secure any construction materials or outdoor tables, fences, or anything else that could potentially be used to start fires or used as weapons. Please leave your lights and security cameras on. And as always, please call 911 if you learn about or witness any illegal activity. Second, please know you're not alone. Your city council is committed to reform and action. I'm joined today by City Commissioner Mingus Mapps, who shares my focus on common sense and meaningful reform. I'm also joined by Portland's law enforcement partners. Like all of us, they're not perfect, but one thing about them is clear. In the words of Acting Portland Police Chief Chris Davis, free speech and expression are values they took an oath to uphold. Violence and wanton property destruction are the crimes they took an oath to prevent. We will still have support from the Multnomah County Sheriff and the Oregon State Police. We'll have patrol and logistical support from other local law enforcement agencies as well. As police commissioner, I've made it clear that every officer must be easily identifiable by name or number, that bikes and normal uniforms must be used unless violence breaks out, that use of force must be a last resort, and warnings, and everyone should be provided with ample warnings and safe opportunities to disperse before any use of force occurs. As the mayor, I've declared a state of emergency to allow city bureaus to facilitate peaceful First Amendment activity and respond to any violence if necessary. And finally, I'd like to thank Governor Kate Brown for making available the state police to support us, and if necessary, select members of the National Guard who will be standing by to keep our city safe. Those resources are already on the way. Before I hand it over to others who are here today, I want to remind everyone that even a verdict of guilty on all charges is nothing to celebrate. There's no adequate compensation for what happened. A verdict, even in my opinion, the right one, is just one small milestone on the long road to justice. Any verdict must be cause for reflection on the incredible trauma Black and brown people have experienced and continue to experience. It's a moment for us to redouble our determination to do more, to create a city where everyone is safe and feels safe. Our work is just beginning. And now I'd like to turn it over to Commissioner Mingus Mapps. Commissioner Mapps?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and hello to my colleagues. I appreciate this opportunity to speak with you today. I want to make 2 points. First, I want to call for peace. No matter what the courts decide today, I know that in the coming day, there will be protests here in Portland. And there should be. The status quo is unacceptable. Portland and America need to do better. But before you go out to protest, please hear my argument on why those protests should be peaceful. As a Black man in one of the whitest cities in America, I appreciate my white allies. But to our white allies out there, before you throw that brick through a museum window, a church window, a restaurant window, please take a moment and have this conversation with at least 3 people of color. Ask a person of color, would trashing this Starbucks make your life better? I suspect you will discover that acts of vandalism and violence are completely disconnected from the project of helping people of color live freer, safer, and more prosperous lives. I also want to take a moment to reiterate Commissioner Hardesty's plea to please stop setting buildings on fire. No one ever intends to die in a fire. Yet every year, 4,000 Americans do die in fires. I have known several people who have suffered terrible injuries in fires. And let me tell you, having the flesh burned from your bones is about the worst thing I have ever seen. But I can imagine one thing worse, and that is being the human being who sets another human being on fire. So when you're out there protesting tonight, please think about that before you light that match. The second point I want to make today is this. I believe that Portland's best days lie ahead of us, but today our city is hurting. That's why I wanted to challenge every Portland out there to help Portland heal. If you love the city and want to make it better, please volunteer 3 hours of your time over the next 3 months to some project that helps Portland heal. If you're not sure how to get involved with a neighborhood improvement project, I'd point you to Solve, a neighborhood community group that's been organizing volunteer-led neighborhood cleanups throughout the city. To sign up for a neighborhood cleanup, go to Solve's website, www.solveoregon.org. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'll turn it back to you, Tim.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Mapps. Our next speaker is Senator Avel Gordley. Senator Gordley.
Thank you. As we go forward, we have a choice to make: chaos or community. Are we going to choose living in chaos, or are we going to choose building beloved community? As a nation and as a city, we are no longer in denial about the absence of fairness, the absence of justice in the overall administration of justice in these United States. That absence is the fatal flaw in our democracy. And we are living with the deadly, destructive consequences of a flawed system of justice. Yes, this is the reckoning of our lifetime, and we have a choice to make. Will we choose chaos in the streets and destruction, or will we reject that and choose a path of peace, peaceful, urgent correction? Will we choose building beloved community? And let us remember that our children are watching. I believe I turn it over to Senator Carter.
Senator Carter, you can unmute your mic.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Go
Okay.
ahead.
I want to say thank you to Senator Gordon, but to our mayor who has shown leadership in trying to lead us all into a more positive place in this community. Because as we all know, this is a very pivotal moment in our society. It is a moment that calls for contemplation and thought. Because if we were to find ourselves being destructive on everything that happens in our society, I believe that we're headed for failure. And as Americans, we're used to successes. As Oregonians, we have striven very hard during our history to try to make this a very successful and beautiful city. So I'd like to see us moving toward strategizing and planning together in a cohesive and peaceful manner. We can do that. We can do that, so we want to see what is different from the status quo. And that comes down to all of you guys in city government, state government, and national government to understand the voices are calling for something different than the status quo. Yes, we are faced with many tragedies of law enforcement across the nation, and all of us should stop and just reflect on the change that is necessary in bringing dignity and respect to all of our citizens in this country. I want to honor and respect the constitutional rights we are all entitled. I want our governmental systems to understand that as well. That is the thing that allows us to march in peaceful protests. But when some choose to deviate from peaceful protest and engage in what I call riotous activity and destruction, we must take in consideration that people who provide the services of the very places being destroyed are the places where fellow citizens work. Many who are of low income, many who have no other means of providing food for their families are now without any means because the businesses have to close. I'm not too ashamed, folks, to beg you as activists to please march in peace. And I strongly want you to consider how destructive behavior is destabilizing the very institutions that provide food and shelter and opportunity for so many people of low income status. Those are the very people that I hear that you are trying to help. The mayor has invited communities across our city to come and talk. I have heard that. He has said to me on the telephone, I want our activists to let's sit down and talk as a community. I am asking you today, I am pleading with you today to please accept the opportunity to have conversation about change in our governmental institutions. You can do that. We can do that. I am also calling upon our elected leaders to realize that these are golden moments in our country. These are moments where unrest is calling upon us to hear the voices for change and to further realize that accepting the status quo is not working and that it's time to sit as leaders in our community, sit, listen, and learn from the voices that are calling for change. In my closing request, our mayor has responsibility for the safety of all of Portland's citizens. And it has been over a year now that we've been experiencing disregard for our downtown businesses and the once held beauty of our city. I believe the council got the message. I do believe that, activists. The status quo is no longer acceptable. I hear that. They hear that. We as a community hear that. Let's talk. Let's sit down and talk about it. Let us put on the table in peaceful conversations plans and strategies for moving forward in peace with one another. I know what it is to feel as if nobody is listening. I've been arrested in downtown Portland for marching. I know what that is about. But we did not tear up our city. And so what I am begging you today to realize that, yes, the problems of George Floyd is all over our nation, but that our city is trying to work toward a betterment for all in our society. Join us in sitting down and talking about these issues. Thank you, Mayor, for this day.
Thank you, Senator Carter. All right, we're going to continue now with the Portland Police Bureau Acting Chief, Chris Davis. Chris, you're on.
Thanks, Tim. Good afternoon. Whatever the jury verdict is this afternoon, we anticipate large free speech gatherings in our city. The First Amendment to the Constitution protects your right to gather with others and express yourself. For those who want to peacefully protest, the Portland Police Bureau's job is to help you do so, even if you are protesting about the police. This is a fundamental role for police in a democracy, and it's one we take very seriously. Our officers are trained to address behavior and never the content of someone's speech. We will facilitate the exercise of free speech while ensuring people are safe and respecting the rule of law. Unfortunately, we also expect that some people will use this moment as cover to engage in criminal activity, and we have to be prepared for this too. Working with our partners at the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office, the Oregon State Police, the Multnomah County District Attorney, and other city bureaus, we have planned to have resources in place to meet the city's public safety needs, whatever those may be. I want to be clear about something. If you're involved in criminal activity, including property damage, arson, or attacks on police officers and other community members, you can expect to be arrested, prosecuted, and held accountable. Our community has made it very clear that it will not tolerate criminal activity and that it expects us to hold people who commit crimes accountable. We all recognize the need for change in our public safety and criminal justice systems, and the need to own up to the harms those systems have done in the past. Violence and destruction don't have anything to do with this. People have a right to free speech. They also have a right to be free from violence and anarchy in their communities. We will do everything we can with the resources we have to protect the safety and uphold the rights of all members. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Chief Davis. Now we're going to go to the next speaker. We've got to get her on camera here. Bear with me. Fire Chief Sarah Boone.
Thank you, Tim. Hello, my name is Sarah Boone, Fire Chief for Portland Fire and Rescue. First, I want to acknowledge the pain and trauma of what our community and our nation has faced over the last year. Unfortunately, people have chosen to express their pain, frustration, and anger through destruction and hate. But make no mistake, that targeted energy and collective rage should be directed towards an unjust system and not towards each other. My heart goes out to the George Floyd family, our community members, and my peers. Portland Fire and Rescue will do everything in our power to protect lives and property and carry out our mission. I would like to remind everyone that the current conditions are severe enough that we still have a burn ban in place. Please heed our fire warnings and act appropriately. The risk to the common good is too high. I would also like to note just a few days ago, a dumpster fire turned into a significant third alarm fire. But thankfully, no lives were lost. Do not weaponize fire because it can lead to unintended consequences and put lives at risk. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Boone. Next, Acting U.S. Attorney for Oregon, Scott Ospach. Scott.
Thank you. My name is Scott Ospach. I'm the Acting U.S. Attorney for Oregon. And I've been trying cases in state and federal court for more than almost 40 years as both a defense attorney and as a prosecutor. And although what we've witnessed over the last few weeks in the courtroom in Minneapolis has been painful to watch, what we have seen is a trial of a police officer charged with serious crimes being broadcast into every home in the country for everyone to see. And what you've seen, from my opinion, is a fair trial in which the evidence will be looked at carefully by a jury who is doing their solemn civic duty in an emotionally charged situation, yet they will rise to the challenge. They will set aside their personal feelings and any prejudices they may have, and they will act in accordance with their charge given by the judge. And that is the nature of our democracy and of our judicial system. Although none of us know what the outcome of the proceeding will be at this time, what we do know is that what happened to Mr. Floyd was a tragedy, and one that has exposed in each and every one of us the need for change. And that change has been happening. For many of us, it's too slow and it's come with setbacks. But I implore all Oregonians not to let the outcome of one single trial let us become too confident that the change is finished or too frustrated that no change has yet occurred. Neither alone tells the whole story. If you disagree with the verdict that'll be handed down and you want to raise your voice in response, we all welcome that. Likewise, if you agree with the verdict and you want to raise your voice, we welcome that as well. But what none of us can condone is violence in response to either outcome. Vandalizing local small businesses, churches, and cultural institutions does not further the cause of justice or racial equality. If anything, it drowns out that message and is a disservice to all of us. I hope we can look back on Mr. Chauvin's trial as a positive inflection point for our ongoing pursuit of a more perfect union, regardless of this outcome today. What it gives us here in Oregon and beyond is the opportunity to demonstrate that we will not be defined by tragedy. Finally, to those who are considering coming to downtown Portland or anywhere in the city to do violence, if you commit a crime that can be charged as a federal violation, you will be charged. If you commit a crime in which jail or prison sentence is possible, we will be asking for it. Come out and let your voice be heard, but do not drown out the voices of social and racial change in Portland. Our community deserves better. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Osbach. This is the point now where we'll open up the floor for the media to ask questions. Please raise the hand in the column, and let me remove the spotlight here. And I'll get to your questions as quickly as we can once my mouse gets to working here again. There we go. Having technical issues. Here we go. Okay. All right, we'll start with what I see on top here. Bridget Chavez, who is your question for? And go ahead and ask your question.
Sure. Mine's for Portland Police or the mayor. So we're wondering why PPB's tactics have changed over the course of the last few months. We know that they did the kettling method a couple months ago, which worked to prevent people from damaging businesses. But the last few nights, we've seen more damage and a different tactic. Can you kind of explain the thought process there?
Sure. And the short answer is our tactics have changed because this group of self-described anarchists have changed their tactics over time. And so we've evolved to meet the challenges that those changes cause. Our priority is always life safety. And then after that comes the free exercise of speech, the protection of property, and arresting people who are responsible for property damage. And with that strategy, we have fewer arrests, but they're arrests for more serious charges, and they're starting to make a pretty significant impact.
All right, thank you. Let's go. Kelly Azar, you have a question, and who's it for?
Yes, I do. It's for the mayor, if you don't mind. To start us out, I mean, you were mentioning this group of about 100 self-proclaimed anarchists, and we seem pretty clear that they are out to do damage. So you recognize people are there to do damage. Why can't you shut it down? Obviously, people are fed up, and if you can't, who can?
So the challenge is that people have constitutional rights to assembly and free speech. So we cannot preemptively, for example, go to a park and arrest people for having shown up. It's still legal for people to show up. And what typically happens is they move quickly and they engage in acts of criminal destruction, and then the police are playing catch up from the get-go. So that's just the reality that we're dealing with. It's a small group of individuals, but they're highly motivated. They move quickly, and where we are able to respond, we respond, and where we are able to make arrests, we make arrests.
And just a quick follow-up, if you will, you mentioned that we have the right to protest. And of course, I understand that First Amendment right, of course, but a lot of people are bringing up the fact that last year we spent 100 days in protests, demonstrations, and riots. And now they are concerned that we are facing that yet again. How are you going to make sure that our city is not going through that this year?
I think there's two things that need to happen. And I want to acknowledge, first of all, what you just said. Everybody is definitely tired of what we've been witnessing, particularly for the last few nights, just the wanton criminal destruction, the attacks on churches, the attacks on youth organizations, the attacks on businesses, including those owned by people of color. And I think all of us agree that last summer was exhausting and it was damaging, and we don't want to go back there again. So there's really two broad categories of tactics we're using to ensure that things are better this year. First of all, we're engaging the community in a meaningful way. And I'll have more to say on that in the coming days, but we want to work with nonviolent demonstrators, those who want to peacefully protest. We want to work with them to make sure that they have what other tools or resources or support they need to be able to do that peacefully. And we are engaging the community and community leaders using Amnesty International protocols, as well as working with the Peace Project of Portland State and other organizations. So you'll hear more about that in the coming days. And then we're doing a better job of coordinating with law enforcement from the federal level to the state level to the county level. And just in the past few weeks, we've had a number of meetings where I've attended that have included the governor, the county chair, the police bureau, sheriff's offices, state police, and others to ensure that we're communicating, that we're coordinating, that we understand what resources we need. And related to that, we're also looking at legal strategies for these individuals who are engaged in these acts of criminal destruction. As I say, they put out flyers, they show up, they're all wearing black bloc. They then engage in acts of criminal destruction. We're looking at some legal strategies that could also help alleviate that kind of behavior going forward. And I'm sure Deputy Chief Davis would agree, probably the best thing we can do is make arrests of those who are engaged in these activities, ensure that the district attorney has whatever evidence he needs and his team needs in order to make a prosecution, and hold these folks accountable.
All right, thank you for that. Let's go next with Lindsay Nadrich, and members of the media, one question only, please. We're running out of time. We got 6 minutes left, so if you can just ask one brief question, we'd appreciate it. Lindsay, who's your question for?
Deputy Chief Chris Davis, along with holding people accountable and making arrests, why can't more arrests be made when we see a group of people smashing windows, and oftentimes we only hear of one person arrested, they spend maybe one night or an hour in jail and they're right back out on the street? And I know that's the prosecution side, but explain, why aren't more people being arrested when we see this kind of destruction at businesses?
We have to balance the need to intervene in the moment with the need to do so safely and to do so in a way calculated not to escalate the situation. And sometimes we can turn a bad situation even worse by trying to make that arrest then. But that does not stop us from doing follow-up investigations and making arrests afterwards. And we've had some fairly high-profile arrests that we've made after the fact. So just because someone gets away from the scene does not necessarily mean that they will get away with that. And then to your question about being held in jail, that when someone has been arrested, the penalty for that comes after a court process. And lodging someone in jail is typically for the purposes of identifying them issuing the charges and then, determining their identity, and then holding people in jail only when we absolutely have to, in pending a trial. And especially with the COVID crisis, I'm sure the sheriff's office could speak better on this, but with the COVID crisis, we have that consideration as well to try and reduce the number of people in close quarters in custody.
All right, thank you for that. Next, Alex Zielinski. You have a question for the mayor?
Hi, yeah, thanks. I put it in the chat box as well. I wasn't sure, but I have a question for the mayor. Can you detail the state of emergency that you've called and explain what it allows that maybe wasn't allowed before, and any information about how long it will last? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. So there are about 15 different emergency powers that the mayor holds when an emergency is declared. Some of the most important for this particular situation is the ability to declare a curfew if necessary, and I've not done that at this point, but that remains an option. It allows me to close streets. It allows me to close public facilities, including parking garages and other structures. So it just gives us a little more flexibility during a difficult situation. I have implemented this emergency order for 24 hours, but I have the ability to extend it if necessary.
All right, thank you, Mayor, and thank you for your question. Alex, how about Kendra Kent? You are next, and who's your question for? Kendra Kent?
Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself. Thank you. My question is for Acting Chief Davis. My question is, should Portlanders expect that every time there's a protest or a riot, that if they have an emergency, they should expect to wait hours for somebody to come answer that call? And can you just talk a little bit about, the types of calls that you've had held over the last few days? And what's your message to people who get very frustrated when a serious crime has occurred and they don't get any police response?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. And I know that is very frustrating for people, and it's frustrating for our members as well. What I would say is continue to call. We are still here, and we will still get to emergencies as quickly as we possibly can. Obviously, it is dependent on resources, and the limited resources that we have are stretched very thin. But we are still committed to coming to help you, especially in an emergency. And we have had conversations with other agency partners to try, at least in life-threatening emergencies, to get resources from outside agencies to come and help. But the bottom line is we will do the very best that we can with the resources that we have in the situation that we are in. And what would really help us keep from having to make those really difficult trade-offs is if people would exercise their First Amendment rights, certainly, but if this other group of people that feels entitled to use up everyone else's public safety resources would just call it quits.
Okay, thank you for your question. Tim Gordon, KGW, who's your question for?
Oh, for the mayor, Tim, thanks. Mayor Wheeler, you've described well what the short-term plan is, but what do you see as the solution long-term to affect change, allow for peaceful protests, but stop the violence and the destruction? What's the long-term solution?
So I have said that the destruction, the kind of activity that we're seeing where you have 100 or maybe 200 people who come in fast as lightning, they run down a street, they break windows, they set things on fire. Really, it's hard for the police to be everywhere all the time, particularly with limited resources. And as a result of that, the police are often playing catch up or resorting only to investigation. That can be effective. I think it's really important that for those who are engaged in those activities, we make as many good arrests as we can, and that we encourage prosecution of those individuals and that we hold them accountable. I think that will have an impact. We have stronger relationships now with our federal and our state partners than we've had previously. And I would not be surprised if in the coming weeks we don't see more federal intervention, particularly on the legal side of the equation. That could lead to some very strong potential sentences for those engaged, particularly in things like arson and criminal destruction. It can actually lead to people being killed. I think that would make an impression on people. But what's going to make the biggest difference, in my opinion, is not law enforcement. It's going to be the community. And the community is finally seeing clearly and unequivocally that the individuals who've been engaged in the activities of late are not protesters. They are criminals. They print flyers that say, come and participate in direct action. Direct action is a euphemism for criminal destruction. They wear black bloc, and repeatedly they go after businesses. They go after employers. They go after nonprofits. They go after churches that support our homeless population. They go after youth organizations that serve youth of color. It's pretty obvious that they're about destruction. They're not about any wholesome activity or any particular noble value. And the public's opinion has absolutely begun to shift against the actions of those individuals. And I have to say, we even saw it, the other day in the Pearl District. We saw residents leaning over and shouting at the protesters, the people who are engaged in destruction, and telling them to go home and knock it off. We saw the same thing in the South Waterfront, where residents were saying, "Stop it! You're wrecking our neighborhood. You're scaring our kids, our families. Go away." And so they're starting to see their welcome worn down. And I think that more than anything else, along with having their photographs in the newspapers and some of their leaders serving significant sentences, I think that will ultimately, over the long term, have the desired impact of ending this. It's got to be law enforcement doing its job and the community saying, breaking things and injuring people, lighting buildings on fire, sometimes with people, and say, those aren't our values. And those of you who are engaged in it, we do not support you and we want you to stop.
All right, thank you for that question. Look, we're a little over, but we just have one hand up, so we'll get to that. Genevieve Rayon, what is your question and who's it for? And then we're done.
Thank you for taking this question. It is for Mayor Wheeler, and I think if Senator Carter would like to speak to it as well, that would be great. But Mayor Wheeler, I heard you talking about repeatedly that these people have one motive, and it is to do destruction across our city. But we just got a flyer that says there's going to be a protest at 3 o'clock. It says no streamers, no peace police, just rage. It is clear what the intent is there. We know this is happening. I think Portlanders just want to know, asking people to stop clearly isn't working. So what do we do next? How do we actually get it to stop?
So I will remind you that 3 years ago, I brought an ordinance to the city council that was preemptive in nature. And I was not able to convince the city council that that ordinance was worth passing. So the tools that we have available to us today, which are respectful of the United States Constitution and the First Amendment, leave us the option of, if we know something's going to happen in advance, then we can plan for it in advance. And so, yes, it's helpful if people put out a flyer, but we don't always get that advance warning. And we don't always know whether it's one group or if people are going to break off and go down a different street. Sometimes we get lucky and the police are there, but oftentimes it's a splinter group and they'll go down a dark street or they'll go down a different direction. And there might be some group of people that are there for peaceful reasons and they just want to march. Fine, knock yourself out. But it's the other splinter groups that are more problematic. And I think the police are doing everything they can to be there, to respond, to be prepared when they know that something's going to happen in advance, to make good arrests, meaning arrests that the district attorney can prosecute, and hold those individuals accountable. That's obviously what we're trying to do.
Okay, that'll wrap it up for us. Thank you, Mayor, and a thank you to all the panelists who joined us today. And the media, if you have any other questions or anything you need answered, reach out to either myself or Jim Middaugh in the mayor's office, and we'll try to help you as best we can. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.